Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today, let's talk about goal setting. Are you a goal setter? Have you set goals for yourself to get to some end result that you want and set little steps of progress along the way? So it's almost like checkpoints to see how close we're getting to that end result. Maybe you even write down the goals that you have set for yourself and actually track the progress over time. So what we know about goal setting for both teachers and students is that it's really a highly effective practice, and it does yield some great results. So I want to dig into goal setting and really think about what are the components to a great goal and how do I write those steps for progress along the way. And a lot of times we may hear about goal setting or objective setting within the context of an IEP, but I really want to broaden that thinking. We're really thinking here in our multi-tiered systems of support with tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. We're really thinking here about goal setting even for making progress toward gap closure or skill development. And when I think about it in the context of just general education, tier 1 core instruction, every single learner at the end of the day is working toward those end goals that the standards bring to us. We have a year's worth of time, both teachers and learners, to really take in as much of that information and master it and retain it as we possibly can. So every single one of those standards is an opportunity across all the subject areas and grade levels. It's an opportunity to decide where we are on this trajectory of learning. How much development do I have to have personally to make it to that end goal? And from a teaching standpoint, we want to make sure that all of our students are, making progress and building their skill sets. And so tracking that and really thinking about what's my end goal and communicating that very clearly up front to students is really critically important. So I pulled a little bit of a quote here to start us off. That says teachers must make space in their learning day for students to appraise their own work and examine their progress toward goals. So one of the best motivators, especially for older students, is to know what they're working for. Having that purpose, that context for learning is really important. It sets the stage for a lot of kids are very competitive, but it sets the stage for engagement and sometimes that drive to make sure that the learning can happen. So we want to think about goals or setting them from a teacher perspective and from a student perspective. And what does it really take to track our progress and set a really good goal so we know exactly what we're looking for, how we would measure it, how much time we have to complete that goal, et cetera. So here are some general goal setting guidelines that I want to take a look at before we get started. And of course, I do have a couple of graphics and templates that maybe can assist in that goal writing. Personally, for students, they could use those to write goals, and also we can use them as teachers as well. But we need to know kind of the parameters of goal setting. So we need to follow some guidance here. So the first piece of guidance that I'll offer everybody as they're embarking on setting goals is making sure that you know exactly what you're working toward. So based on some type of information or data, or again, a targeted outcome, it could be a standard, or it could be a post-secondary outcome with, employment or graduation, or whatever the outcome is, independent living, whatever that transition-based outcome. We could set it based on that. We could set it based on a skill set that we really have to develop, maybe a foundational skill that's really essential to our success. But we need to know exactly what is the target and what do we know about the student's current understanding or foundational knowledge of the skill itself or the skill set. We need to know from data what's our baseline that we're working from, and then the goal that we're working toward. We also need to be super explicit for the student's sake, for our sake. What is it specifically that they will be learning or producing? How will they access this skill, or their supports that will need to be in place? And what specifically will that skill, when it's demonstrated, or knowledge, when it's demonstrated, what will that look like? Another point, just a bit of guidance here, is focus on one skill or one type of support at a time per every goal or every objective. I see a lot of goals and objectives written that are these huge clusters of skills or clusters of knowledge. And while that sounds like a great thing, sometimes it can be very confusing because as soon as we put multiple verbs or multiple skills into a goal or an objective, we're trying to measure multiple things at the same time, and our data can get kind of fuzzy. So including just one skill or one type of support at a time is probably your best bet. The next bit of guidance is really make sure that when you use a verb within a goal, that it's both observable and it's measurable. So I've seen verbs in goals or objectives that students will maybe understand something. So when I have to sit back and think, how do I observe understanding? How would I measure it? It's kind of one of those verbs that's a little bit fuzzy. Understanding is something that is a mental process that we really can't kind of dig in, open up, and see what that looks like. So measuring it's quite difficult. But if we say the student is going to demonstrate a certain skill, they're going to write down something, they're going to communicate something, they're going to be reading something, or doing some type of a calculation or counting, those kinds of verbs we can actually see a student doing. We can measure their accuracy with whatever it is that the target skill might be. So use observable and measurable verbs whenever you're writing your goal. And you can even ask yourself the question, can you see the student showing you them demonstrating this goal? All right. Another step or bit of guidance is really about using a progression of skills or a learning progression, and really deciding what are the students' strengths within that progression and what are the needs that they have. So when I think about a large set of skills, so I use the term read and write. Ooh, those are huge skill sets. So reading is a compilation. If you've gone into the word recognition chapter or even the theoretical models chapter yet, you'll know that when you say that word read or write, it's really this complex combination of skills over time. And it's the outcome of a lot of different things. So if I want the ultimate goal of reading, let's say, I have to unpack what it means to be a reader. What's the very first part in that processing that goes into reading? From understanding the sounds in language to the symbols that we use in language and putting those together to decode words that we are seeing in print, and then making meaning from that. And then, in the context of the sentence or the paragraph or the page, we're really giving that larger structure to get that contextual understanding where we can comprehend everything that's happening. So which part of that, if I have that full skill progression from a measurement standpoint, from a data standpoint, I need to know which skills along that pathway from a learning progression standpoint does the student currently have, and which skills might be missing. Are all of the skills not there? Do they have some skills kind of splintered throughout? The only way that I can really understand what my goal will be is to know where the students are in that trajectory and really pinpoint and target either through the goal itself or through the objectives, which we'll talk about here in a little bit too, those stair steps to get to the goal. We don't want to target objectives in skills that the students already demonstrated. That would not be a good use of our time or the students' time. So we want to pinpoint the objectives that are still needed to get to that end result, and that requires some data. The data will also help us understand the rate of growth that we can outline in the goal. So if the student is, has achieved some of those skills, but it's taken them a couple of years to achieve those skills, our rate of growth, we can't necessarily set magic goals and objectives that within a certain number of months or even within a school year, they're going to master this plethora of skills. If that's not traditionally in their rate of growth, it's not their kind of track record. So we want to make sure that we understand very clearly what skills and needs the students have, and how they typically progress through skill development from a rate standpoint. The other piece that we want to note before we move into the goal setting is, can we identify any potential barriers that the student may have achieving the goal. And again, you heard me just a second ago use the term magic goals. I've seen a lot of magic goals over the course of the years. And while we want the magic to occur, the reality for many of our students to develop independent practice, independent skill sets, is that they may need some scaffolding and supports to achieve those skills and gain independence. So we have to make sure that if we see potential barriers that the students could encounter, we're either addressing those. If it's a skill barrier, we address those through an objective. If it's an access barrier, we're going to address those through the supports that we're embedding in the goals and objectives, or scaffolds. And that can include things like accommodations, the scaffolding I mentioned, or assistive technologies possibly. So there may be some supports that we're kind of integrating and pairing with the skill development. So let's take a look at the features of every goal. Every good goal and every good objective should have these 5 things, okay? So I call these the one-handed IEP or goal and objective characteristics, and we want to make sure that every single goal and every single objective hits these 5 points. So the first point is that every single goal or objective should align with a need. It should be aligned with something that the student needs to have skill development on. It's something they don't currently have. It's something maybe that they've been struggling with or challenged by for quite some time, and we really need to have this skill development to get to the outcome we want. So we want to make sure that based on the data, that this specific goal or objective, set of objectives, is aligned with the need that they have. The second piece is that it's measurable. So we talked a little bit in those guidance pieces that we want to have an observable and measurable verb as part of this work. We want to make sure that the verbs are measurable. That's our third piece. And we want to make sure when we're observing, we have a data set. So if we're observing a student completing a skill, how many times do they have to complete the skill? With what type of accuracy do they have to complete it? So the verb and the measurability piece here kind of go hand in hand. So we need to know what we're observing and how often, how much, what criterion we're pairing that with. The fourth piece is the scaffolding. What tools or supports will lead the student most closely to becoming independent with this skill? And it's a possibility scaffolding in the objectives could fade over time to where they don't need the scaffolds or the supports anymore. But it is also a possibility that sometimes tools like certain assistive technology tools will stay and remain even into the goal. And we just need to know the difference in those types of support. Is it something that they need? Scaffolding is typically there for a little bit and then fades, whereas things like assistive technologies or some accommodations really will be supports that will remain there for quite some time, including in some cases for a lifetime. The tools may change over time, but the need for the support doesn't really go away. It's always there. So how will we build in those supports for students to gain independence? And then the last piece that's part of every great goal and objective is a time frame. What kind of timeline are we thinking about for this goal or set of objectives to be completed and finalized, where we really think the outcome will really be there? So all of these 5, we would call them a must. There's an acronym there, aligned with the need, measurable, use of great verbs, scaffolding, and time-bound, help us ensure that we have all 5 of those components in every single goal and every single objective that we're writing. There is a little bit of a document or a table. Both of these resources will be available for download in the resources section. But there is a little bit of a table or a template that you can use, also visible here on the right-hand side, that just outlines a must, the 5 factors for every goal and objective. And it gives questions. It's almost like prompting questions that you can answer. And if you answer each of those questions, in total, you can build your goal or objective statement. So it is really helpful, especially if we're working with learners in developing their own goals and objectives. By answering those questions, they can actually develop a goal statement that includes all 5 of those essential components. And again, you can use it as a teacher if you're developing goals for a learner or for yourself. Definitely available for anybody who'd like to use it. So let's take a look at an example and see if all 5 of these must-have factors are present in this sample goal. All right, so here's the goal. Count by 5s and 10s to 100. Does this goal follow the guidelines, and does it have all 5 of those non-negotiable characteristics for a goal? Okay, so remember, A is aligned with the need, M was measurable, U was using observable, measurable verbs, the S was that support or scaffolding piece, and the T was time bound. So let's go through these one by one and see if this statement, this goal statement, has all 5 of these components or what might be missing. And this goal is a little bit unfinished, so we probably are going to have to edit the goal. First, I want to talk before we go into the 5, though. Remember in the guidance, we said that within every single goal or objective, we really should be focusing on one thing at a time. So as I read this goal statement again, count by 5s and 10s to 100, right away I see that we have 2 different sets of criteria here that would need to be measured separately in order to really be able to report the mastery of both of these skill sets. So one of the things that I would encourage people to do is separate the 2 out. So what is the end goal? Is the end goal to count by 5s or 10s, or is it even something else? We may actually use these as 2 separate objectives to get to a larger whole. So maybe the computation itself in multiples is the goal itself, but we're going to kind of stick with this, but let's separate it out. So let's just say we're counting by 5s to 100 to be more precise. Okay. So we would eliminate one of those parts right away. So let's say, ask a question, is this goal aligned with the student's need? Now, we don't have all the data and the background information on this particular student, so we're going to make an assumption that yes, we've seen data, and counting in multiples is really one of those facets that we really have to kind of dig in and fix. It's a huge area of need, and it relates to other outcomes, so we have to have it mastered before we can ensure that we get independence in other things. So let's take a look then at the M, the measurability part here. So is measurability mentioned in this goal statement? Count by 5s to 100. So right away, we're seeing that we really don't see any type of accuracy mentioned. We don't really see any type of criterion for how often or how much. Or with, again, what percentage of accuracy or type of accuracy. So measurability is a missing factor we would have to add into this goal over time. What about the U, the usability of the verb, a measurable and observable verb? So in this specific case, count by 5s to 100. Count is our verb. And can we observe someone counting? As long as it's not a mental process and they can count out loud or physically demonstrate their counting, we could observe that. So I think the verb here is okay. It's flexible enough that it allows for students to count in different ways, and it doesn't say they have to count out loud. They can demonstrate, again, counting in a variety of ways. So the U is taken care of here. So far we have the A and the U, the M is a little rusty. We would have to fix that. What about the scaffolding, the S here, the scaffolding toward independence or the support that the student might need to get to this end goal? Is there any support mentioned? Count by 5s to 100. So not really. We don't necessarily see manipulatives or counting tools or any type of a scaffolding system mentioned, and maybe the student doesn't need it. That's always an option. It's a possibility. The student does not need any scaffolding. They really have to master the skill by themselves. Or so that in that case, we would say they were going to independently count by fives to 100 without the use of any tools. Okay. So it's not mentioned, but we would have to take that into consideration. Is it needed or not needed? So that's one to look back into. And what about the time bound piece here? Count by fives to 100 by when? So right now we don't see a date set for this ultimate goal to be finished or completed. And so that would be something that we would also have to take into account. So in this example, we have quite a few areas that we need to go back and revisit to make this goal whole again. And again, we could take the components that are there and put them into this template, leave the others blank and fill those in so that we eventually could write the whole goal statement in its entirety. Okay. So the three components that really help us build this whole sentence. So in this case, there's a targeted behavior that we have in mind. We have a specific skill. Usually that's that verb. There usually is a condition of some sort. So in a certain amount of time with a certain amount of accuracy, the conditions are related to both the measurability and the time piece and the specificity of what it is they're doing. And then the criterion for acceptable performance. And again, that goes back to the accuracy piece. What does acceptable performance look like here? So in this case, if the targeted behavior was for the student to read out loud, remember we created that example just verbally about reading and how many skills are part of that. Even in this case, the student would maybe have 36 weeks of time to read selected passages, a variety of passage on their targeted grade level, again, from a very specific source. So some of these these conditions are kind of constraining. While we want the criterion for the amount of time, and we do want some flexibility, so the passages can be flexible. They may have to be at a specific targeted grade level. I'm sorry, the student's aligned age and grade level. But from a specific source is a little bit rigid. So maybe we would want to loosen that up as part of the flexibility or the scaffolding, that those texts could come from a variety of sources and not just one source. And then again, the criteria for success here, if we went back and put this kind of goal statement into a must framework, we probably would see that there are some things that we would have to indeed tweak a little bit, but there's a lot that's here already. So in this case, 84 words correctly read in 1 minute's time. So that relates to more of a fluency type of measure. And hopefully that comprehension is coming out of that. But it doesn't necessarily say this is a comprehension goal. It really talks about reading aloud. So maybe this is just about accuracy of reading, fluent reading. And so again, I would go in and kind of question a little bit to make sure we have total clarity on what the target is here. Is the target really that fluency piece, or is the target a little bit more about the comprehension piece? And making sure that we have all of the right pieces and parts here. Now, from an objective standpoint, I'm going to go back up here to our graphic one more time. From an objective standpoint, we have to be thinking, we just looked at those math goals and the sample reading goal here. What kinds of stair-step skills are we going to need to bring the student closer and closer to that end result? And we want to keep in mind that when we're writing objectives, when we're developing objectives, there are really a couple of different types of objectives that we would be writing. One set of objectives is this increase in discrete skills in the progression. So an objective is going to really outline the skills. Remember, we talked about a learning progression before, and maybe there are skills that are part of that learning progression that the student has not mastered yet. We have an ultimate goal in mind. Those learning steps in the progression could actually become your objectives across a certain time frame to get us to that end goal. So maybe the objectives are discrete skill progression to get to a different outcome. So that means every objective may be a little bit different, but they're all necessary to get us to that end step or end target. Now, the other kind of objectives, sets of skill development to get to a goal, would actually be this almost like a stair step or an increased hierarchy or development of criterion over time, where the skill set is the same. So it's the same skill, same skill, same skill, same skill. But what changes is the amount of accuracy, the amount of endurance, the amount of independence, and again, the amount of scaffolding that's required. So it's a possibility objectives could be practicing the same skill over multiple time frames where we have checkpoints along the way. And at each one of those checkpoints, we're sometimes maybe decreasing the amount of scaffold that the learner has, or we're increasing the amount of accuracy that we want for a student to demonstrate, or their endurance, how long, if they have more stamina to continue the task for longer and longer periods of time over the course of the objectives, again, to get to that end goal. So keep in mind that when you're developing objectives, there are these two different types of objectives, and what best fits the skill set that the student is working on. Is it really this long progression of skills to get to an end skill? That's that first type, where we have discrete skills leading to the end. Or is it a single targeted skill that has to be developed and the student needs lots and lots and lots of practice and really high levels of scaffold initially, but hopefully we can fade that scaffold and get better accuracy and independence over time. So what kind of goal are we talking about? And that's, again, the decision that your team can take a look at and make, depending on the outcomes that we want. So hopefully both of these graphics, this process, this conversation will be helpful when you are writing goals and objectives, whether it is for student use in Tier 1 core instruction to get to the end goal of all those standards that we're trying to master, or if a student is working in Tier 2 or Tier 3 intervention and we're partnering with students and families to make sure that we know we have skill development over time for progress monitoring and gap closure, to get back on track for grade level learning. Or, of course, we always can use these tools when students are identified as needing IEPs, and for IEP goal and objective development, of course, you can use it there too. But I really wanted to broaden the thinking that really setting goals and objectives for ourselves is a high yield strategy and an evidence-based practice that we could all benefit from. So hopefully these resources will be helpful. Of course, we would love to hear feedback. And if you have questions, of course, please feel free to reach out. And until next time, I wish you well. And I hope that you set some wonderful goals and tell us about your success with using the goal and objective practice. We would love to hear about that too. All right. Until next time, take care and best of luck.